They said lightning could never sign peace. They were wrong. On a world made of salt and storms, one man and one woman stand between power and ruin. Their hands will bridge what history tried to break, and their choice will decide whether light saves or destroys. Some storms end with silence. This one begins with it. Night settled heavy over Rallis Haven. The air tasted of salt and ozone, the way it always did before a storm. Beneath the long arc of the Oraline Bridge, the mud began to glow. Not a reflection, its own light. Soft blue veins rippled under the waterline like breath moving through skin. Lieutenant Cale Dre slowed the Ardent 9 skimmer and checked his console. "Field readings wrong," he muttered. "Ion densities triple baseline." Nara Sid's voice came through static. "Centra array confirms it. The surge is local, not atmospheric." Kyle stared at the data. Every pulse came from the same depth, 30 meters under the floodgate foundations. The last time he'd seen a pattern like that, a capacitor bank had gone critical. He opened comms to Commander Ilian Rowe, requesting lockdown of the Rallis line. "The B field is unstable." "Denied," Rowe replied. "We can't halt power to the capital. Assess and report." Lightning stitched across the distant horizon. The glow in the mud brightened, spreading toward the bridge pylons. Cale felt the vibration through his boots, faint but rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat under metal. He dropped from the skimmer and waded into the shallows. The mud was warm, too warm. Each step sent tiny arcs across the surface. "Silt capacitors are bleeding charge," he said quietly. "If they link up, the whole grid could—" A voice cut him off from the opposite bank. "You are trespassing on Dominion ground. Sarah." Ven stood with 2 guards from the Thal Dominion, her cloak wet with mist. Silver gills flared along her neck as she breathed. Kyle raised his badge. "ECC maintenance detail. Your grid is about to fry itself." "It is not a grid," she answered. "It is the breath of our soil. You disturb it with your machines." He sighed. "If we don't isolate the surge, your breath will light the city on fire." The guards tensed, hands near their shock spears. For a moment, only the hiss of steam and the whisper of rain filled the space between them. Sarah stepped closer. "Then prove your claim, off-worlder. Touch the mud and tell me what you feel." Cale crouched, pressed a probe into the glow. The sensor flared red. Currents climbing through the ground itself. It's feeding on residual plasma from the bridge. Midway through his sentence, the earth trembled. A deep hum rolled underfoot, rising to a shriek inside the metal frame of the floodgate. The surge hit, bright enough to turn the night white. Cale dove behind the skimmer as a column of light erupted from the water. Static burned across his visor. The waveform matched no ECC system. He looked back toward Sarah. She stood still, the glow reflecting in her eyes, unmoving as if listening. Hours later, long after the lightning faded, the mud still pulsed faintly under the broken sky, alive, waiting. And in his report draft, Kyle typed the same line twice before stopping. The surge beneath Rallis was not mechanical. He paused, watching the glow dim through the rain. It felt like it wanted to breathe. The glow under the floodgate never faded. It pulsed through the night like breath against glass. Cale had stayed to record readings, but the log kept looping. Each time the sensor reset, the same pattern appeared. 2 peaks, 1 pause, repeating like a heartbeat. By dawn, the wind rose from the southern marsh. The tide swelled against the barriers of the Oraline Bridge, pressing against its joints. Overhead, the Centra array flickered, struggling to stabilize telemetry through the charged mist. Cale wiped condensation from his visor. "Rowe, it's escalating. We need a power dump before the field sinks with the bridge." Static answered him. The channel was gone. He turned toward Sarah Ven. She had remained near the embankment, her cloak drawn tight, eyes fixed on the lights rippling beneath the surface. You still think this is a natural rhythm? He asked. She didn't look at him. Every current on Talamere has a pulse. You mistake life for malfunction. Life doesn't spike at 12 kilovolts, Kale replied. He keyed the relay to initiate bleed-off from the Silt capacitors. The bridge shuddered with the deep hum of energy release. Sarah shouted, "Stop! You are cutting through the sacred layer!" Her words drowned under the groan of the plasma girders. Lightning traced the sky in a net of white, and for an instant the whole structure sang. The vibration built until the metal itself seemed to cry out. Kyle felt the charge crawl across his suit. The bridge's field coils were overloading, feeding on the ion haze. He slammed the manual override. "Grounding sequence now!" The command came too late. A bolt split the air, striking the far pylon. The impact threw Kale backward. A second wave followed, brighter, looping down the bridge's own conduits and exploding through the floodgate's sensors. Water erupted upward in a wall of steam and blue fire. The shock wave hit before Kale could brace. He rolled, vision white, ears ringing. When the static cleared, he saw Sarah lying near the edge, her guards gone. Only the hiss of boiling mud remained. He ran toward her, boots sparking across the charged surface. "Don't move!" She tried to push up, but arcs leapt from her hands. Kyle yanked the insulation seal from his pack and wrapped it around her arms, dragging her onto a broken support. The air smelled of copper and burnt rain. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the sizzle of cooling metal. Sarah finally whispered, "You've broken the bridge's song." Kale looked up at the trembling lights of Rallis Haven beyond the floodgate. "No," he said quietly. "Something else broke it before us." Above them, lightning flared again, but this time the surge rose from the ground, climbing into the clouds as if answering back. Hours later, the storm still hadn't ended. The bridge lights flickered like dying stars, and the night stretched on far past a normal shift. The rain had eased by morning, but the air was heavy with static. Mist clung to the broken pylons of the Auraline Bridge, rising from cracks where plasma still bled faintly blue. Kale Dre set up a temporary camp on the ridge of the energy dam. The floodgate was gone, half of Rallis Haven's power grid with it. His suit's diagnostics looped endlessly. HarvNet was silent. Every relay node along the delta read signal unavailable. He tapped the side of his headset. "Sid, do you copy?" Only static answered, sharp and dry like sand grinding in a wire. Sarah Venn sat nearby beneath a collapsed girder, wrapping her injured arm with thin strips of insulation. Her voice was quiet. "You call into the storm again, but it does not answer." Kale looked up from the console. "HarvNet should have come back by now. The interference isn't random." She tilted her head, eyes half closed. "Then listen closer." He frowned, rerouting power through his wrist module. The receiver hissed, then pulsed. 3 short beats, a pause, then 2 long ones. The same pattern repeated, again and again. "That's not machine code," he said. "It's rhythmic." Sarah stood, listening. "It is a tide song. My people hum it to measure salinity. Each note changes with the charge in the water." He stared at her. "You're saying the interference is singing?" "Not singing. Remembering." She traced a line in the wet air, drawing the pulse of the pattern. "The marsh keeps its memory through vibration. You have disturbed it, and now it speaks." Kyle watched the readings shift with her movements. The match was exact. For the first time, data and myth aligned on the same screen. Hours passed under the dull gray sky. They shared a ration pack, the silence between them broken only by the hum of cooling metal. In that quiet, something eased. Kale spoke softer now. "If this pulse is memory, maybe it's warning us where the current flows next." Sarah nodded. "Or warning what waits beneath it." He keyed a deeper scan. The graph rippled. Between the harmonic waves, a jagged spike appeared, one that didn't fit the natural rhythm. Cale froze. That's artificial. Someone's tunneling the capacitor beds. Sarah's expression hardened. Then this war has already started. He adjusted the thermal scope toward the lower flats. Through the haze, faint heat signatures moved, slow, deliberate, then vanished beneath the mud. The line went dead again. Cale exhaled, feeling the vibration return through the steel deck, faint but alive. The pressure line was building once more. Night closed over the marsh like a slow tide. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick and warm, every surface humming faintly with leftover charge. Cale Dre crouched on the edge of the ruined floodgate, his lamp casting a thin cone of violet across the mud. Under the ultraviolet glow, the ground shimmered, tiny veins of light weaving between pools of dark water. Saraven stepped beside him, her bare hand hovering just above the glow. "They're still alive," she whispered. "Old capacitors. Forgotten when your engineers built the new grid." Kyle adjusted the sensor gain. "They're pulsing in sync with the rain frequency. That shouldn't be possible without power input." "The rain carries the charge," Sarah said. "It falls through the clouds, through the song of the storm." "The mud remembers," he gave a quiet laugh. "You talk like a scientist who lost faith halfway through the paper. And you talk like a soldier afraid to believe what his instruments show." The tension faded with her words. Cale glanced at her, then down again at the glowing pattern. Each pulse followed a spiral, not random but ordered. He traced the line on his tablet, matching it to the sensor data. The model formed a perfect helix, its symmetry too precise for erosion or chance. "This isn't a flood grid," he murmured. "It's a stabilizer. Balances the charge between land and sea." Sarah reached into her pack and unfolded a sheet of flexible fiber etched in luminous ink. The pattern was identical. "This map has passed through 9 generations. We were told it kept the tides calm." Cale's breath caught. "Your ancestors built this?" "Or found it," she said softly. "We never knew which." They set both displays side by side, his digital scan and her living map. The patterns merged seamlessly, the lines glowing brighter where they overlapped. Rain began again, soft as static. Cale opened his mission log and typed the entry by hand. Provisional Silt Treaty. Joint observation between ECC and Thal Dominion. Established to prevent full detonation of the capacitor field. Sarah leaned closer, reading each word. Her eyes flickered with the same light that pulsed beneath them. "A treaty written in data," she said. He nodded. For once, maybe numbers and faith can coexist. For a while they stood without speaking, the night alive with quiet rhythm. The mud beneath their boots glowed brighter, each pulse matching their heartbeats. Under that phosphorescent skin of Talamere, 2 signatures, one human, one native, blended into a single current. And somewhere deep below, the planet seemed to exhale. The night after the accord was quiet, almost reverent. The marsh had stilled, the air heavy with the scent of rain and iron. For the first time in days, Cale Dre believed they had stabilized the surge. He stood on the ridge beside Saraven, watching faint lights shimmer across the flooded plain like distant stars trapped in mud. Then the first alarm pulsed through his wristband. "Unregistered ignition. South quadrant, Rallis perimeter." Kyle frowned. "That's a no-fly zone." Who the hell? A streak of white cut through the low clouds. A missile, infrared-guided, diving too fast. Its trail glowed amber, then scattered as it entered the dense vapor layer. Sarah turned toward him. "That's not Dominion ordnance." He barely heard her before the impact. The explosion rolled across the horizon, blinding and silent for a moment, then a shockwave slammed into them like a wall. The sound followed, deep, metallic, endless. Cale's visor filled with static. "Silt capacitor chain reaction," he shouted. "The missile triggered a field discharge." The ground trembled. Lightning rippled sideways across the flats, igniting pools of wet barium. The whole basin became a lattice of fire. "Get to the transports!" Cale called to his crew, but their voices vanished in the roar. A second projectile hit somewhere farther north, this time closer to the settlements. Sarah grabbed his arm. "There are villagers near Sunder Flats." Cale hesitated only a second before turning the Ardent 9 toward the glow. "Hold tight!" The skimmer sliced through the storm, its ceramic hull deflecting arcs of stray current. Charred reeds floated past, each one sparking like wire. Ahead, a cluster of shelters burned in blue flame. Sarah jumped off before the craft stopped. She moved through smoke, pulling survivors free with her bare hands, her gills fluttering as she breathed the toxic air. Cale followed, dragging a generator pack to power the filters. "Over here!" she cried. A young boy, Tiv Wren, lay unconscious beside a cracked capacitor drum. The container hissed, releasing invisible vapor. Kyle checked the readout. Ionized chlorine. Lethal in minutes. He slammed a seal patch over the leak and lifted the boy onto his shoulder. "We have to move." They ran toward the ridge as another capacitor ruptured behind them, spraying arcs of light across the shallows. The noise was like thunder trapped inside steel. By the time they reached higher ground, the entire southern plain was aflame, electric fire crawling over water. A blue inferno feeding on its own reflection. Hours later, the fires dimmed, leaving smoke that smelled of acid and salt. Cale sat beside the wrecked skimmer, his suit blackened. "The missile wasn't random," he said. "Infrared targeting can't lock through that vapor. Someone guided it manually." Sarah watched the horizon, her face pale in the glow. "You mean from orbit?" He nodded slowly. "Or from someone who knows how to fake a Dominion launch signature." The boy stirred beside them, coughing through his respirator. Cale looked down, voice low. "We just saved proof of what really happened." Sarah met his eyes. "Then they'll come for him." Cale stared at the burning marsh, at the lightning still crawling beneath the water. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The storm had ended, but the war had just begun. 2 days after the burn of Sunder, the marsh still breathed smoke. The mud steamed like blood under a pale dawn, and the air smelled of iron and ozone. Cale Dre hadn't slept. He sat inside the command shelter at Rallis Haven, the comms array glowing weakly against the mist. The relay to orbit flickered, struggling through the static haze. Commander Ilian Rowe's voice cut through at last. "Lieutenant Dre, Earth Colonial Command authorizes full lockdown. No one in or out of the flats until radiation clears." Cale looked up from his console. "Sir, the Dominion won't accept that. Their people still live out there." "That's not your concern now," Rowe said. "This comes from the top." Behind Cale, Sarah Venn turned sharply. Her voice trembled, quiet but edged. "Your lockdown means sealing my kin outside your walls." "You call that peacekeeping?" Rowe's image blurred in static. "Miss Venn, this decision is not open for debate," the signal snapped, leaving the tent full of silence and the soft hum of dying equipment. Outside, banners of the Thal Dominion rippled over the flooded street. The elders had gathered near the broken plaza, torches flickering against the wet glass of the basin walls. Eld Matri Theros stood in their center, his silver crest reflecting the stormlight. "You bring our daughter home with foreign fire still burning," he said, his voice echoing over the crowd. "Now your council locks the river. Do they fear our dead will swim to them?" Sarah stepped forward. "El Theros, But the old man raised a hand. "You speak with their voice now. You wear their mark." His eyes shifted toward Cale's uniform. "And you bring him here to finish the work," the crowd murmured. The smell of salt and smoke thickened. Cale met her eyes. "We should leave. Before this gets worse, too late." A shockwave rippled through the plaza, a surge from the lower grid. Sirens wailed from the ECC outpost. A voice from the crowd shouted, "They're moving weapons! They'll strike again!" Then chaos erupted. Rocks hit the metal barricades. Flares burst in the rain, red against the gray sky. Cale pulled Sarah toward cover as shouts grew louder. From the comm line, Sid's panicked voice crackled through. "Cale, the mob's heading toward the energy depot. Your backup's gone offline." He looked toward the depot. Its walls glowed faintly, heat building inside the capacitor tanks. "If they hit that site, the whole ring goes up." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Let me speak to them. You'll be killed out there. They're my people. They'll listen. Maybe. Before he could stop her, she ran toward the crowd, raising her hands. Her voice carried through the rain. Stop! The fire wasn't theirs! But fury drowned her words. Someone hurled a flare. It struck the wall beside Cale, exploding into molten glass. He lunged forward, shielding her as sparks hissed across the ground. When the smoke cleared, she was holding him upright, his arm bleeding through the sleeve. Cameras blinked in the distance. Civil feeds, drones. Every lens recording the moment she caught him in her arms. By nightfall, the footage had already spread across the network, a human soldier saved by a Dominion envoy, a traitor, framed in perfect light. The divide had begun. The footage looped endlessly across every screen in Rallis Haven. A Dominion envoy cradling a wounded Earth officer. The image alone was enough to split the planet in half. Cale Dre shut the terminal off. The glare burned through his eyes even when the light was gone. Outside, protesters chanted beneath the rain, voices merging with the low hum of the floodgates. He turned to the only thing that still made sense: data. The HarvNet logs shimmered across the console, 1,000 lines of encrypted telemetry. Each packet was a time-stamped pulse, recorded seconds before the missile strike. He ran a filter. One frequency refused to match. "Come on," he muttered, isolating the anomaly. The signal repeated in a pattern of rising chords. 5 beats, 2 rests. Ion chord structure, but wrong. Too clean, too deliberate. Sarah Venn stood at the doorway, her clothes still wet from the basin. "You're chasing ghosts again." "Not ghosts," he said, eyes fixed on the readout. "Look at this. The pulse doesn't match planetary noise. It's synthetic." She stepped closer, reading the trace. "That's Orvian Dynamics carrier band." Cale froze. "Their transmitters are supposed to be locked under Dominion oversight." "They are," she said softly. "Unless someone gave them clearance." He accessed the encrypted layer, bypassing command authentication. The system hesitated, flashing unauthorized access detected. Cale ignored it and forced an override. A stream of code unfolded, then a tag appeared at the end of the header. EID lock. Corin R. Kyle's jaw tightened. "Major Ren Corin," he whispered. "My own division chief." Sarah's expression darkened. "He's the one who negotiated the arms treaty last year." He had access to every targeting grid. Cale leaned back, numb. That explains the missile vector. The strike wasn't a mistake. It was staged. The rain drummed against the shelter roof, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. "You'll have to report this," Sarah said. "Report it to who?" "The Corps already signed off on Orvian's operation. If I send this up the chain, it vanishes." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then send it to everyone," he hesitated. Breaking an IDLOC meant treason. Every security code embedded in his DNA would flag him for mutiny. His hand hovered over the console. "Kyle," she said quietly, "if you don't, they'll keep burning the marsh until there's nothing left to argue over." He closed his eyes, remembering the children pulled from the fires, the boy coughing through a mask. Then he pressed the key. The system screamed warnings in red. Data breach detected. Command protocol violation. Cale transmitted the log through the open channel. Within seconds, the feed went live across every remaining relay in orbit. "The truth belongs to both sides," he said. Sarah touched his shoulder. "And now both sides will come for us." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled beneath the clouds. Quiet filled the room, thick and heavy. Cale looked at her. "We were never enemies, were we?" "No," she said. "Just people told to be." He allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Then maybe that's where the treaty really begins." Before she could answer, the lights flickered. The relay hissed, all frequencies collapsing into static. The sky outside turned white. Sarah stared upward. "That's not lightning." Cale grabbed the console, reading the last clear data string. Centra Array just went dark. All satellites offline. A wave of charged wind swept through the camp, bending the antennae like reeds. The electromagnetic storm was already here. The wind screamed through the ruins like a living thing. Shattered pylons sparked against the black sky. arcs of blue light snapping from girder to girder. The air itself burned, ionized rain falling as thin streaks of liquid fire. Kale Dre led the survivors across what remained of the Oraline Bridge. The plasma conduits, once alive with steady current, now hung limp and dark over the flooded valley. Each step rattled through the metal skeleton beneath them. Sarah Venn walked close behind, her breathing mask flickering. "The field density's rising. If we stay up here, we won't," Kale said. "Half the structure's gone. Once this span gives, we'll ride it down." Behind them, a dozen others followed. Engineers, wounded militia, a boy clutching a broken relay core. The electromagnetic storm had erased every signal, cutting both ECC and Thal Dominion from orbit. No orders, no rescue, no proof that either side still existed beyond the static. The wind shifted again, carrying the tang of ozone and burnt salt. Kyle stopped, staring into the storm. Lightning crawled across the sky like veins on glass. Then the sound came, a deep crack, low and final. The bridge shuddered. For a heartbeat it held, glowing from within, and then the whole span tore free. "Jump!" Kale shouted. They dove as the deck collapsed behind them. Steel screamed, cables snapped, and the Oraline Bridge, once the artery of two worlds, fell into the marsh with a blinding flare. Hours later, they crawled onto the mudflats, soaked and coughing. Every inch of ground pulsed with residual charge. Sparks flickered beneath their boots, tiny bursts of blue and red. Kale checked the scanner, nothing but noise. "We've lost all frequencies," Sarah coughed through her mask. "Then the war's over. No one can talk to anyone." He looked at her, then out across the drowned plain. "No, it's just begun again. Quieter this time." They pressed on, the group moving through a field of twisted pylons, half submerged in glowing water. Each flash of lightning lit their path for only seconds before plunging them back into darkness. At one point, Kale stumbled. The mud hissed beneath his glove, tiny arcs snapping across the surface. "Even the ground's turned against us," he said. Sarah handed him the last oxygen canister. "Breathe. You need it more." He shook his head. "We share it," she smiled faintly. "You sound like a Dominion elder." "Maybe your stories are starting to make sense." They passed the canister between them as they walked, each breath tasting of metal and rain. For a moment, the storm eased. The silence felt almost holy, just their steps and the faint rhythm of the world still discharging energy. Kyle glanced back at the shattered bridge, its remains glowing faintly in the distance. "The bridge kept us apart," he said quietly. "Maybe it had to fall." Sarah looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same light. "Then let's make sure it wasn't for nothing." Before Kale could answer, the boy shouted from ahead. "Something's moving!" They froze. The mud rippled under the lightning's flash. At first, Kale thought it was a reflection, a trick of light. Then the scanner crackled to life on its own, showing a wave of electric pulses moving beneath them. Pattern recognition kicked in instantly. The rhythm matched perfectly. Sarah's voice barely carried through the wind. "It's the same frequency." The surge beneath! The ground trembled. Kale tightened his grip on the sensor module. It's not gone. It was waiting for the bridge to fall, and somewhere under their feet, the planet began to hum again. The storm had broken, but the sky still glowed. Lightning crawled soundlessly across the horizon, its reflection trembling on pools of black water. Kale Dre waded through knee-deep mud, the air buzzing with faint static. Every step sparked pale arcs that faded too fast to see. Behind him, the survivors followed in silence. Sarah Venn walked last, steadying Tive Wren, the boy they had pulled from the fires of Sunder Flats. Her arm was bound with soaked bandage, blood dark beneath the film of rain. "Keep the pace," Kale called. "We'll set camp once we reach the high ridge." The child nodded weakly. Sarah didn't. She only glanced at Kale, her face lit by the dim blue flicker from his scanner. Hours later, when the rain thinned, they stopped near a cluster of ruined pylons half buried in silt. The air smelled of ozone and salt. Kale rigged a thermal tarp and checked Sarah's wound. The bandage was warm to the touch, too warm. "You're burning," he said. "It's nothing." Her voice was faint, almost lost under the crackle of static. "Nothing," he muttered, "is what got my team killed last time." He opened a vial of antibiotic gel from the med kit and pressed it gently over the wound. The surface hissed against her skin. She flinched but didn't move away. "You treat pain like a machine would." That's how machines survive. She smiled, tired but genuine. "And yet you keep saving people." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind settled, carrying only the low hum of distant thunder. Kyle adjusted his wrist unit, tuning the receiver through the static. A faint pattern appeared. A rise, a fall, then 2 short bursts. He froze. That rhythm again. Like the surge under Rollis. Sarah turned toward the sound. "It's not random." He recorded a few seconds and replayed it through the speaker. The pulses were slow, melodic, almost human. Sarah closed her eyes and began to hum. The tune matched the signal exactly. Her voice was low, layered, vibrating softly in the mist. Kyle stared. "You know this song?" "It's older than the Dominion," she whispered. "A tide chant. We sing it when the marsh blooms. It measures the salinity of the water. Each note marks a change in current." He watched the scanner as she sang. The waveform stabilized. No interference, no noise, just perfect resonance. "You're aligning the field," he said quietly. "The sound is data. It's encoding the electric strata." Sarah opened her eyes. "My ancestors called it listening to the deep. We never knew why it worked. Only that it did." Cale leaned closer, voice hushed. "What if the song isn't just tradition? What if it's a language the planet left behind?" She looked down at the mud glowing faintly under the tarp. "Then maybe it's still speaking." The boy stirred beside them, mumbling in his sleep. The rhythm of Sarah's humming softened, drifting into the background hum of the marsh. Midway through the night, the wind shifted. Cale adjusted the field generator to shield them from the static, but the signal returned on its own, fainter this time, coming from below. He activated the sensor probe. The readings traced a spiral beneath their camp, identical to the helix pattern they had mapped days ago. "Something's under us," he said. Deep, Sarah's eyes followed the waveform. "A current chamber. Maybe older than any Dominion map," Cale nodded slowly. "If that's true, it could explain the surges. The bridge collapse, the capacitor fires. It's all the same cycle trying to balance itself." She pressed a hand against the wet ground. "And we're the ones breaking it." Cale looked out across the flats, the storm's reflection rippling like molten glass. "Then we need to see what's down there." Sarah's voice was quiet, almost carried away by the wind. "The marsh keeps its secrets until someone listens long enough." He glanced at her, at the faint glow beneath her hand, where the current danced through the mud. "Then let's listen." As dawn crept over the flooded valley, the song continued, soft, rhythmic, and patient, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath their feet. The marsh was quiet again, but the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. Dawnlight barely reached the flooded valley, its reflection broken by ripples of electric haze. Cale Dre knelt beside the sensor array, his fingers moving over the damp controls. The device hummed, a low frequency pulsing through the mud. Then the screen flared, a spike in the magnetic field deep below their camp. Sarah Venn stood beside him, eyes narrowing. "That's not a capacitor surge." "No," Cale said. "It's a structure. Metallic mass, 40 meters down. Geometry too clean for natural formation." He expanded the 3D scan. Lines appeared, curved and concentric, like a spiral shell half buried in silt. "The signal's harmonic," he murmured. "Same resonance as your song." Sarah looked toward the horizon where mist curled above the flats. The song wasn't meant to summon. It was meant to remember. Then let's see what it remembers. By midday, they had gathered what remained of their gear, one functioning probe drone, 2 plasma torches, and a single oxygen tank. Cale led the descent, guiding the tether line into the sinkhole that had opened during the storm. The mud swallowed them in slow layers. Static danced around their helmets, faint blue threads crawling like veins through the dark. When Kale's boots struck solid metal, he exhaled sharply. Contact surface. It's smooth. No corrosion. He brushed the silt away, revealing a hatch, its surface embedded with crystalline filaments that still glowed faintly. Sarah floated down beside him, her breath fogging the visor. It's alive. Or remembering how to be. He pressed the scanner to the panel. The filaments pulsed once, then spread outward in concentric waves. A deep tone filled the chamber, vibrating through their suits. The hatch unsealed with a slow exhale of gas that smelled faintly of salt and ozone. Inside was light, soft, golden, steady. They descended into a cylindrical corridor lined with plates of translucent metal. Every few meters, thin arcs of energy bridged across the walls like veins of lightning trapped in glass. This isn't Dominion design, Kale said. No welds, no mechanical joints. Sarah traced a hand across one of the panels. It reacted, displaying streams of symbols suspended in the air. The language shimmered, half biological, half digital. What is this place? She whispered. Kale stared at the walls. Relay 9 archive. It matches fragments from the old database. A pre-human installation, maybe hundreds of thousands of years old. They reached the central chamber, a sphere suspended over a pit of glowing liquid. The air vibrated with faint rhythm, the same pulse Kale had tracked for days. In the middle hovered a holographic console, still active. Kale touched the control node. The projection bloomed around them, forming a moving globe of Talamere as it might have been eons ago, green, vast, and warm. Then the voice came, not words, but modulation shaped like thought. The hologram shifted, showing towers that reached into clouds, power drawn from the marsh below. Lightning moved through the air like water, feeding into colossal capacitors buried beneath the surface. They harnessed the planet's charge, Kale said softly, to stabilize weather, balance orbit. An entire civilization built on the mud. The display darkened. The towers flickered, then crumbled. Storms consumed continents. The field inverted, turning the marsh into the burning deserts they stood on now. They used too much, Sarah murmured. Drained the current faster than the planet could heal. Kale watched the final frame, cities dissolving into static. They built their own extinction. Sarah stepped closer to the projection, her eyes wide. The image shifted, zooming on a figure, humanoid, with faint webbing between the fingers, gills along the neck. Her breath caught. They look like us. Kale's voice fell quiet. Then maybe your people didn't evolve here. Maybe you inherited it. She touched the hologram's edge, her reflection merging with it. We sang their songs without knowing whose voices they were. He looked at her but said nothing. The hum of the archive grew deeper, the resonance pushing through his chest like a second heartbeat. A tremor rippled through the floor. Lights along the wall flared red, patterns shifting into something chaotic. Sarah stepped back. What's happening? Kale checked the console. External signal. Someone's accessing the archive. Remotely. From where? He looked up at the ceiling as the hologram glitched, flickering to a single word repeating in red. Orvian link. Above them, a column of light shot upward through the mud and into the sky. Kyle grabbed Sarah's arm. They found us. The structure shook violently, arcs of electricity spidering through the chamber. She shouted over the roar. Kyle, what do they want? He stared at the beam piercing the surface. Whatever this place still remembers. The floor cracked open beneath them, revealing a spiral of energy spiraling into the depths, alive, ancient, and waiting. They emerged from the sinkhole into blinding gray daylight. The storm had moved east, leaving the flats glistening like molten glass. The wind carried a new sound, sharp, rhythmic, synthetic. Kale Dre's visor flickered alive before he even touched it. The Harvcom's network, silent for days, was suddenly active again. Dozens of feeds pulsed across the display, each stamped with the seal of the Earth Colonial Corps. Sarah Venn watched as the headlines scrolled past in the air. Dominion militia ambushes peacekeepers at Sunder Flats. Another line followed. Humanitarian operations suspended. Native insurgency confirmed. She turned slowly toward him. That's a lie. Cale didn't answer. The transmission quality was too high, too synchronized to be rumor. Someone had coordinated this. He activated the relay drone and patched into the satellite backbone. If the array's transmitting again, he said, then somebody flipped the override key. Orvian dynamics? Maybe. Let's find out. He pulled the console's cable from his wrist module and connected it directly into the relay's core. Data flooded the screen, encrypted routing paths, proxy nodes, dead-end pings through military archives. Cale traced one signal after another until a familiar signature appeared. ODX-7H, Orvion Dynamics Defense Node. His heart sank. They're using the core's network as a mouthpiece. They're rewriting the story before it's even finished. Sarah stared at the projection. Your people will believe it. Ours will answer in kind. That's how a treaty dies. Before Cale could respond, his comlink crackled to life. Commander Ilian Rowe's voice filled his headset, strained and cold. Lieutenant Dre, you are to cease all investigation immediately. Do you copy? Cale froze. Sir, the transmissions are falsified. That's an order, Lieutenant. The Council has declared Dominion aggression. You will publicly rescind any claim of a peace accord and return to base. He hesitated. With respect, Commander, you saw what we found down there. I don't care what you found. The politics are already in motion. Stand down, the signal snapped off. Cale lowered his head. For a moment, all he could hear was the whisper of static through the wind. Sarah stepped closer. You have proof they faked the attack. If you show it, then I'll be court-martialed. Labeled compromised. Everything we've done erased as treason. Then let them erase you, she said quietly. At least the truth will exist somewhere. Cale stared at the relay drone, its lens blinking like a patient eye. The archive's data crystal lay in his palm, glowing faintly with the pulse of the deep chamber below. Inside it were records. Images, voices, the entire lost history of Talamere. And the evidence that Orvion's interference had reignited the same ancient cycle. He exhaled slowly. HarvNet's not designed for open upload. I'll need to break its idlock chain. That's forbidden, isn't it? He smiled faintly. Everything worth doing is. He keyed in the override. The AI responded instantly, its voice cold and neutral. Warning! Idlock is proprietary. Tampering will trigger self-defense protocol. Cale ignored it. The console glowed white. Lines of code streamed upward like rising smoke. He entered the access phrase, each word precise. Bridge 27. Verify vector. Release truth. The AI paused. Lieutenant Dre, this action constitutes rebellion under Article 9. I know, he said. But maybe rebellion's the only thing that still listens. The broadcast began. Across the sky, comm relays lit one by one, transmitting the unfiltered data, the deep chamber, the holographic record, the collapse of the old civilization. The images painted themselves against the clouds like ghosts made of light. Sarah watched, her face illuminated by the flicker. They'll hunt you for this. Kyle's voice was calm. They already were. For a moment, there was silence. The rain had stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. We kept building bridges to hide the water, he said quietly. But it was always there, waiting. Then the feed stuttered. HarvNet's tone changed, low and wrong. Every relay light turned red. A message appeared across the interface. User Dre Cale revoked. Hostile node identified. Sarah stepped back. Cale? He looked up at the storm returning from the east. The clouds pulsed with light, the color of fire underwater. Too late, he said. They're wiping the whole grid, the comm line screamed. Power surged through the air, shaking the ground beneath them. The sky itself began to flicker. Every satellite caught in the same cascade of failure. The first lightning strike split the horizon in two. And above the chaos, the network that had once bound the planet together began to die. One signal at a time. The storm never left. It only grew. By dusk, the sky above Sunder Flats had turned the color of burning metal. Each flash of lightning carved silhouettes of towers and broken bridges across the horizon. Kale Dre stood on the ridge, visor tinted crimson from plasma glare. Below him, the old relay station burned. The Dominion militia had overrun it, their banners barely visible through the ash and rain. And in the heart of the chaos, glowing like a dying sun, stood the Silt capacitor arrays, one after another, overloading. He keyed his transmitter. "Squad 2, status!" a voice crackled back, strained. "We've sealed the north conduit, but the charge keeps climbing. 60% over limit. She's gonna blow, Lieutenant." Kale looked at the field readouts. Every capacitor was chained to the next through the ionized ground. One went, they all would. The blast would level Rallis Haven before sunrise. He turned to Sarah Venn, her armor streaked with mud and light. "We can't shut it down remotely. The relay's cooked. Then we break the circuit. That means triggering a directional burst. We'll have seconds to escape if the gates hold." She met his eyes. "Then we make them hold." They moved fast. The last of the engineering crew followed Kale into the floodgate structure, an immense dome of steel and crystal veins humming with unstable power. Each step sent blue sparks crawling beneath their boots. "Set the charges along the lower grid," Kyle ordered. "Staggered delay, 5-second intervals. We vent upward, not sideways." The team worked in silence, the roar of the storm above drowning every other sound. Outside, the Dominion fighters had fallen back, afraid of the light. The ground trembled under each new strike. Sarah's voice broke through the comms. "Kale, Capacitor 5 just breached containment." He ran toward her position. The air shimmered with heat. One of the energy cores had cracked open, spilling molten current like liquid glass. She was holding the manual release lever, both hands locked on the control. "The gate's jammed!" Kale joined her, their visors nearly touching through the glare. Together they forced the lever down. It moved a fraction, then stopped. He checked the readings. Stabilization failure imminent. There was no time. "Get the others out," he said. Sarah shook her head. "Not without you." "Go, that's an order." She hesitated, then placed a hand against his chest plate. The gesture was small, human, desperate. "If you stay here, you die." Kale smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Someone has to guide the charge manually. It has to be timed with the pulse." "Kale, go!" She pulled away, backing toward the exit tunnel as the dome began to groan. Kale watched until she disappeared into the red light, then turned back to the core. He opened the command panel and set the sequence. Manual override, delta pattern. All gates vent vertical. The AI inside the system responded with its cold neutrality. "Confirming user, Dre Kale. Warning, fatal exposure probable." "Confirm anyway," the hum deepened. The capacitors aligned, energy surging in a single rhythmic pulse that matched the heartbeat of the planet. Kale placed his hand on the terminal, feeling it vibrate like the chest of a living thing. Outside, the storm howled. He could almost hear Sarah's voice through the static, calling, pleading, but the signal was gone. He whispered to no one. "If this works, maybe they'll stop blaming ghosts." The countdown reached 1. Lightning struck the dome. The world became white. For a single, endless instant, all of Sunder Flats lifted into the air, a sea of molten glass and rising fire. Then came the red bloom, wide as a continent, rolling across the horizon like a second dawn. At its center, the floodgate tower folded in on itself, releasing a beam of pure energy skyward. The data embedded in that light, every truth Kale had fought for, streamed upward into the orbiting Centra array. Far above the storm, a single satellite blinked alive, catching the transmission before its circuits burned. Sarah watched from the ridge as the wave of heat reached her, silent and endless. The storm clouds turned scarlet. The wind carried no sound, only a pulse that faded into the distance. She whispered his name once, then bowed her head, and when the red light finally dimmed, Sunder Flats was gone, its surface smooth and glowing like a scar on the face of the world. The fire died 3 days ago, but the air still trembled. Ash clung to every surface of Sunder Flats, glimmering faintly under a copper sun. The floodgate's ruin had cooled into glass, and where once the capacitor towers stood, only black veins ran through the soil like scars of lightning. Kale Dre woke inside a half-collapsed shelter. His armor was fused in places, his comlink cracked but still pulsing a weak signal. Each breath burned. The silence outside was worse than the thunder that came before. He pushed the door open. The world was gray and wet and empty. Drones circled low, scanning for survivors. The insignia of the Earth Colonial Corps was barely visible through the smoke haze. He raised a hand to signal, but none of them responded. Their directives had changed. A medic team finally reached him hours later. Their commander didn't speak his name, only logged his biometrics and marked him for debriefing and containment. He was no longer a soldier. They called him the Source. Sarah Venn wasn't there. He asked once quietly. No one answered. By the second night, Kale was flown to Rallis Haven, now under emergency governance. The city shimmered beneath stormlight, every tower wrapped in temporary shielding, every street patrolled by drones that hummed like nervous wasps. He sat in a windowless room as the investigators questioned him through a one-way glass wall. "Lieutenant Dre," one said, "did you intentionally overload the floodgate array?" Kale stared at his bandaged hands. It was either that or lose the planet. Your unauthorized transmission before the event, was that coordinated with Thal Dominion leadership? He looked up. That transmission was the truth. The lights flickered. Somewhere above, the ion relays were still unstable. The interrogators left. The door sealed behind them with a hiss. Hours later, Nara Tid appeared, his old field tech, her uniform torn and eyes hollow. She carried a data slate hidden beneath her jacket. "They think you caused the surge," she whispered. "They're using the chaos to erase everything from the archive." Kale took the slate. "And Sarah?" "She's alive." Dominion forces pulled her out near Glasswater Basin. Nara hesitated. "Orvion has her. They're calling it protective custody." He closed his eyes. Relief and dread twisted together. "Then she's a hostage." Nara nodded. "They'll trade her for your silence, for your testimony that the Dominion sabotaged the grid." Outside, thunder rolled across the plains again. The storm hadn't ended. It had only changed color. "Get me access to the relay logs," Kale said. "If the satellites caught the surge pattern, we can prove what really happened." "Kale, they'll execute you before that data ever sees daylight. Then we make our own daylight." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she slid the slate across the table. "You didn't hear this from me." When she left, Kale sat alone, listening to the faint hum of the generators beneath the floor. The rhythm was uneven, like a heartbeat out of sync. He whispered to himself, "The storm took everything, but it didn't take her." Beyond the compound walls, Rallis Haven glowed under broken clouds, shards of blue and red light flickering across the wet streets. The air smelled of ozone and salt. And far to the west, where the glass plains met the mist, the Dominion banners still burned faintly in the wind, waiting for someone to cross the silence between worlds. The rain had turned clear again, washing the ash into the sea. From his cell window, Kale watched the sky flicker between violet and gold, colors born from plasma still lingering in the upper air. Every storm since the burn carried a faint hum now, a ghost frequency looping through the clouds. He recognized it. It matched the rhythm of Sarah's voice when she sang. 2 nights after his release, he found a place to hide in the old sublevels beneath Rallis Haven. The tunnels were warm and damp, still carrying the metallic scent of flooded circuits. Nara Sid met him there with a small data core. "This is what I pulled from the relay before Orvion locked it down," she said. "You'll want to hear this yourself." Kale connected the device to a portable console. The waveform appeared on the display, uneven, melodic, layered like breathing. At first he thought it was interference from the storm, but when he filtered the low frequencies, the sound shifted into pattern. "It's a harmonic ladder," he murmured. "Like a song." Nara frowned. "You mean music?" "Not exactly. More like instructions, written in resonance." He played the sequence again. The pulses rose and fell in measured steps. Between each gap, he detected micro-variations in salinity, data encoded through conductivity itself. It was elegant, primitive, and impossibly precise. Then he remembered the melody Sarah used to hum while calibrating the capacitors, something from her tribe's rituals. He'd thought it was cultural. Now he realized it was mathematical. Every Thal song uses salt levels as notation, he said quietly. They've been mapping energy flows for generations, without machines. Nara stared at him. You're saying her people already knew how to stabilize the mud currents? Kyle nodded slowly. It's the same principle behind the Silt algorithm from Relay 9. They didn't rediscover it, they inherited it. Midway through the analysis, the console pulsed with a new layer of data, visualized as glowing threads swirling into a spiral. The same spiral engraved on the ancient core beneath the flats. He whispered, They tried to tell us how to balance the planet, and we burned it instead. For a long time, the only sound was the drip of water down the corridor. The quiet pressed heavy on them both. Nara finally asked, What are you going to do with it? Kale looked at the projection, at the pattern that felt almost alive. Finish what she started. If I can translate the full code, I can rebuild the capacitor fields without ignition. A living grid, self-healing. She'd want that, Nara said softly. He smiled faintly. She'd want me to stop making war sound like progress. Hours passed. Outside, lightning crawled along the horizon, muted and slow. Kale set the console to playback once more. As the tones filled the tunnel, he closed his eyes. The melody was no longer just numbers. It was her voice, guiding him through the static. By dawn, he'd rewritten half the equation. The rest waited in the depths of the Dominion archives, beyond the electric lake they called Glasswater Basin. He shut the console down and packed his gear. If the code began in salt, he said, that's where it ends. And when the next roll of thunder echoed through the streets above, he was already gone, walking east toward the glowing basin where the water sang in her tongue. Night fell like smoke over Talamere. The basin ahead shimmered in ghost light, an endless mirror of salt water and static. Every step toward it made Kale feel smaller, as if the horizon itself were watching. He crouched beside the Ardent 9 skimmer, adjusting the ceramic soles on his boots. Nara checked the battery packs. Their convoy had shrunk to 5, 2 engineers, a medic, a Dominion scout, and him. The others had turned back when the magnetic storms rolled in. The currents are stronger tonight, Nara said. You sure we shouldn't wait for dawn? Kyle shook his head. At dawn, the basin wakes. The static doubles. We go now or never. They moved onto the glass water at a crawl. The surface hissed under each step, thin as skin, alive with faint blue sparks. Reflections of the stars wavered beneath their feet, then fractured each time lightning flickered across the far cliffs. An hour passed. The silence was a wait. Only the soft crackle of charged vapor and the whisper of their breath broke it. Kale's wrist sensor pinged irregularly, fields rising, then fading, like something breathing under the lake. Midway through the crossing, the air split. A flash, sharp as a blade, tore from the east. One of the engineers screamed. His boot had cracked, bare metal touched the water. The jolt threw him backward, body convulsing in white light. "Get him off the line!" Kyle shouted. Nara leapt forward, her gloved hands gripping the insulation tether. They pulled together, dragging him onto a slab of glassy rock. The medic worked in silence. After a long minute, the chest stopped moving. No one spoke. Kyle closed the man's eyes, then keyed a beacon. The signal blinked red once before fading into the fog. Hours later, the temperature dropped. Their suits frosted at the joints. The surface began to hum, a deep, harmonic pulse that matched the code of salt Kale had decoded. He realized the basin itself was resonating with the same pattern. The water sang softly, invisible waves rippling through the mist. Nara looked around. It's responding to you, to that song. Kyle tightened his grip on the skimmer's rail. No, it's responding to her. He replayed the recording through the console speaker. Sarah's voice, fragmented but clear, rose into the night. The harmonic tones met the basin's frequency, and for a moment, the entire lake lit up. Transparent currents formed lines across the surface, glowing paths stretching toward the Dominion side. There, Kale said. That's the safe corridor. They followed the light. Each step aligned with the rhythm, each pause letting the charge disperse. Behind them, the stormfront chased their trail, arcs leaping between clouds like veins of living fire. By the time they reached the far shore, dawn was bleeding through the haze. The basin's glow dimmed, leaving only ripples of steam and a faint hum fading into memory. Kyle turned back once. The path across Glasswater was already sinking beneath the mist, closing behind them as if it had never existed. He whispered, "The water remembers." And somewhere beyond the rising sun, in the Dominion capital, Sarah Venn opened her eyes to the same distant echo, his voice, carried by the lake. The first light over Glasswater was pale and trembling, the kind that touched nothing yet changed everything. Mist drifted low across the shore, curling around the burnt remains of Dominion banners and the half-submerged pylons of old relay towers. Kyle stood there for a long time, watching the basin breathe. Each ripple seemed to whisper her name. A soft voice answered from behind him. "You made it." He turned. Sarah Venn was standing at the edge of the broken pier, her cloak torn, her face streaked with dried salt. The dawn caught in her eyes, reflecting both exhaustion and something steadier, belief. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The storm had stolen too many words already. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "Orvion still hunts you. They'll call this treason." Kale smiled faintly. "Then it's a fitting reunion." She stepped closer, her boots leaving shallow imprints in the wet sand. Between them, the lake hummed, a low living tone that seemed to wait. "I decoded the song," he said. "The code of salt, it wasn't a prayer. It's a design. The Silt algorithm uses natural resonance to balance charge across the basin. If we upload it through the Dominion lattice and the Earth core grid together, it stabilizes both." Sarah lowered her gaze, tracing a small spiral into the mud with her fingertip, the same pattern they'd found beneath the Relay 9 archive. "A shared current," she murmured. "No master, no slave. That's what they feared," Kyle replied. "A system that doesn't need control." From the cliffs above, faint lights shimmered. Dominion scouts were watching. Farther west, ECC drones hovered in slow orbit, uncertain which side still existed. The war had stopped not because anyone won, but because there was nothing left to power it. Sarah reached into her satchel and drew out a small, translucent core, the final fragment from the ancient trammel. "It survived the burn," she said. "I thought it was just memory. But it's alive. The lattice still sings inside it." Kale took it carefully. "Then this is our bridge." They linked their communicators, aligning the signals across both frequencies, his digital, hers organic. The resonance began as a hum, then grew into a steady pulse that ran through the water, through the salt, through the ground beneath them. A faint glow rose from the surface, tracing the pattern of the old capacitor lines. It wasn't bright, just enough to warm the mist, to paint both their faces in soft amber. Sarah's breath caught. "It's peaceful." For the first time, Kyle said, "the planet isn't fighting us." Minutes passed. The sound faded back into the morning wind. The light dissolved into the rising sun. She turned to him, voice low. "What happens now?" He looked toward the horizon where the sky met the shimmering flats. "We teach them. Dominion and core alike. The energy was never ours to own. It was ours to understand." Sarah nodded slowly. "And if they refuse?" Kale smiled. Then we begin again. They stood together as the sun cleared the edge of the basin, golden light spilling across the calm water. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of promise. Somewhere deep below, the newly awakened grid hummed its first note of balance. The day began without thunder. Only the quiet rhythm of 2 heartbeats and one world learning how to breathe again. The storm had no center, only light. Above Sunder Flats, clouds boiled like molten glass, each pulse tearing open the sky. The world trembled in silence between strikes, waiting for the next breath of thunder. Cale stood on the spine of the half-rebuilt Oraline Bridge, the wind clawing at his suit. Sparks danced along the railings, ghostly threads of blue crawling toward the water. Every gauge screamed over voltage. Every protocol said leave. Sarah climbed the last girder behind him, her cloak soaked, her breathing raw from the salt air. "You can't hold the line alone," she shouted. He didn't turn. It's not about holding it. It's about giving it back. Below them, the basin glowed red where the burnt capacitors still bled energy into the mud. The 2 power grids, Earth's and Dominion's, were out of phase. If they met raw, they'd ignite the entire region again. "Kyle," Sarah said, stepping closer. "We can't synchronize them through the system." "The AI relay's dead." He faced her finally, lightning cutting across both their faces. "Then we use something older." Another blast split the clouds. A column of plasma tore downward, slamming into the far end of the bridge. Metal screamed. Half the support vanished into fire. Kyle reached for the control node, an open ring of conduits humming with residual current. "If we can reroute the charge manually, the storm itself can bridge the grids." Sarah stared at him. "You're talking about using natural lightning as the link?" He nodded. "It's the same frequency as the Silt algorithm's resonance." "It listens to balance," Rain hissed as it hit the heated deck. She looked at his hand, trembling slightly from the charge. "Then it needs 2 frequencies, yours and mine." Before he could protest, she stepped into the node beside him, her bare palms pressed to the wet metal. The system registered her biosignature, merging Dominion current with ECC fields. The sensors flared white. "Sarah, the surge will fry your neural link." She smiled faintly. "You taught me once that equilibrium isn't peace. It's motion." The first bolt struck. Electric light surged up through their arms, through the bridge, through the entire basin. The sound wasn't thunder. It was music, deep and harmonic, a living chord echoing through the mud and sky. Midway through the strike, Kyle's vision fractured. He saw bursts of data streaming through the storm, signatures merging, rewriting command lines in real time. His own aid-lock pulse met hers halfway, folding into one waveform. She whispered something through the noise. He couldn't hear the words, but he felt them vibrate in his bones. Then the storm answered. A second bolt, larger than any before, connected the 2 horizons. The bridge became pure light. For a moment, Talamere was brighter than its sun. The overcharge passed harmlessly through the Silt grid, neutralizing both sides. The readings dropped to 0. Hours later, the rain still glowed faintly from residual ions. Cale woke lying on the deck, skin numb, vision blurred. The storm was gone. Only the gentle hum of a stable current filled the air. Sarah knelt beside him, her eyes reflecting the calm glow of the bridge. "It worked," she said softly. "Both networks are synchronized. The planet's breathing again." He tried to speak, but his voice caught. "And the record?" She pointed toward the sky. Above them, the Centra Array satellites blinked alive, relaying a single harmonic signature across every channel. Their combined ead-locks had burned into the data stream, an energy pattern no one could fake, no one could erase. "It's signed," Sarah whispered. "Enlightening." Cale looked out over the flats. The mud shimmered like living glass, the storm's reflection still dancing across its surface. Then the planet has its treaty. As the last echoes of thunder rolled into the distance, the light of dawn began to pierce through the dispersing clouds. The bridge, now stabilized, arched like a silver spine across the basin. Silent, strong, alive. He reached out, touching her wrist. "We did it together." Sarah smiled, the stormlight fading from her eyes. "That's the only way it ever holds." The horizon flickered once more, just a faint pulse, like a heartbeat of the world itself acknowledging their mark. The thunder drifted away, leaving behind a sky washed clean, and a bridge glowing steady, a living promise written in the language of light. The calm that followed the lightning treaty didn't last an hour. From the horizon, a swarm of metallic glints rose like a second dawn, Orvian Dynamics' retaliation fleet. Their drones, black as glass, cut through the thinning mist with surgical precision. The hum of their engines carried the pitch of betrayal. Kale lifted his head from the bridge's console, eyes narrowing. They couldn't let it end here. Sarah was already moving. Her sensors picked up the incoming wave, 30 attack drones coded for EMP suppression. They're targeting the relay points, she said. If they collapse the plasma flow now, the grids will short again. Kale slammed his fist against the rail. We have no defenses left. The vigilantes are offline. Lightning flashed behind them, revealing the drone's formation. They came in low, like predatory birds over the glowing flats. The storm had faded, but its static still lingered, an unstable charge waiting for a conductor. Sarah turned to him. Then we use what's left of the storm. Kyle caught her look and froze. Sarah, don't. The field's still hot. One misstep, and it burns me alive, she finished, calm as a prayer. Better that than another war. She pulled free the conductive mesh from her suit and tore away the safety nodes. Bare hands against raw current. Her breathing deepened, a dual rhythm from her twin lungs, a sound half human, half oceanic. Kyle stepped closer. If you cross the arc line, you'll become the circuit. She met his gaze. Maybe that's what it takes to make the current choose. Before he could stop her, she climbed onto the bridge's highest span. The plasma cables beneath glowed faint blue, vibrating with trapped energy. Above, the drones locked on, infrared targeting beams slicing through the rain. Sarah lifted her arms. The air shimmered. Droplets bent toward her palms, forming a halo of ion mist. Kale's voice cut through the comms. Sarah! Channel it through the Silt grid, not your body! Her answer was quiet, steady. I am the grid now, the first drone fired. The plasma bolt struck her shield of mist and reversed. The charge rebounded in a blinding flash, splitting the formation open. One by one, the drones convulsed mid-air, their systems overloading as the polarity flipped. Kale ran toward her, his boots slipping on the slick metal. You're drawing too much. The sky lit up in a chain reaction. Bolts of redirected current linked from drone to drone, an electrical dance of destruction. The air itself turned gold, the sound a single deafening chord. A drone, still functional, broke through the storm front and fired point blank. The blast struck the bridge rail beside Sarah, throwing her back. Kale reached her just in time, catching her before she fell into the basin. The scent of ozone filled the air. Her left arm was burned, glowing faintly from subdermal conduction. She tried to speak, voice trembling. It's done. Kale, the feedback loop. Closed! He held her close, shielding her from the falling debris. You're hurt. I've been worse. A faint smile crossed her lips. At least now. The sky fights for us. Above them, the drones dropped one after another, their engines seizing in synchronized bursts. When the last fell, the basin erupted in a soft rain of sparks. The reflection painted her face in hues of molten orange, half fire, half dawn. Kale lifted his eyes to the sky. The lightning was gone, but its echo lingered as a single, low hum across the bridge, a sound like gratitude. He whispered, You turned their war into light. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, still glowing faintly. No, I just reminded it how to listen. The glow in her veins dimmed. The air cooled. The flats fell silent again, save for the gentle hiss of rain. The stormlight faded, leaving the world washed in amber. For the first time, the bridge didn't hum from tension. It sang from balance. Rain fell softly over Sunder Flats, each drop hissing as it met the charged ground. The storm was gone, but the air still shimmered, like the planet hadn't decided whether to rest or to breathe again. Kyle lay beside the bridge's foundation, half conscious, the world pulsing in fragments of light. His skin was pale beneath the burns, the faint blue veins flickering like fading circuitry. Each heartbeat sent a dull current through the wet metal beneath him. Sarah knelt in the shallows, her arm still bandaged from the surge. She looked toward the horizon, where the last of the Orvian fleet had fallen into the sea of mist. The quiet that followed was heavier than thunder. "Kyle," she whispered, brushing mud from his face. "You're not done yet." He opened his eyes halfway, struggling to focus. "Tell me, it held." "It did," she said, voice trembling. "But the charge hasn't settled. The grid's still unstable. If it collapses now, everything starts again." He tried to move, but his hand fell weakly against her wrist. "Then finish it." "The way your people do." Sarah hesitated, staring at the silent basin, the same place where generations of her kind had once sung to the tides. The rain carried that memory as if waiting for the first note. She closed her eyes. The first tone was almost a whisper, vibrating through her chest more than through the air. A melody older than speech, low, resonant, shaped to the rhythm of water. The song of current, once used to balance salinity across the basin, now carried through the fractured power lines of a broken world. The sound wrapped around the metal arcs, sliding along the bridge's spine. Each note met a strand of charge, softening it, bending it back into harmony. Hours passed, or minutes. Time dissolved in that steady cadence. The sky dimmed to a gentle violet. The air no longer crackled. Even the puddles stopped steaming. Cale stirred, eyes half open. Through the blur of pain, he could hear her song woven into the falling rain, each drop a syllable of light. For a moment, he thought it was the hum of the bridge returning. But it was her. His voice broke the quiet. "You sound like the storm when it forgives," Sarah's tone faltered. A tear mixed with the rain as she looked down at him. "It's not forgiveness," she said softly. "It's remembering how to flow." She placed her uninjured hand over his chest, feeling the faint spark beneath his ribs. The current shifted through her palm, guiding the last of the residual charge back into balance. A warm glow spread outward, gentle, steady, alive. The sensors embedded along the Auraline bridge flickered one by one, aligning in sequence. Blue turned to gold. The grid stabilized. Outside the basin, the Centra Array satellites confirmed a reading. Talamere, equilibrium achieved. Sarah exhaled slowly. The song ended. The silence that followed was no longer fearful. It was sacred. Above them, clouds began to part, releasing the first clear light since the war began. A single streak of brilliance rose from the surface, one last arc of plasma leaping skyward, curling into the thin upper atmosphere. Then it dimmed and faded. The storm was over. A final breath of warmth lingered across the flats, the kind that made even the broken metal gleam. And for the first time, Talamere was quiet, not from death, but from peace. A year later, they called it the Silt Treaty. Not after the storm nor the war, but after the mud that remembered both. The basin of Sunder Flats became the meeting ground where two civilizations finally agreed to share what nearly destroyed them. The Auraline Bridge still stood at the center, its surface no longer humming with danger but glowing softly, like a vein of starlight drawn across the water. Every night it lit the fog from below, and travelers said it looked like a piece of the Milky Way fallen to the ground. Cale Dre returned to that place once more, slower now, still carrying the scars of lightning. His left hand trembled when he worked, but he refused to cover it. "Proof," he told the engineers of both worlds, "that light leaves a mark worth keeping." Sarah Venn met him halfway across the bridge. The air smelled of rain and new alloy. The flats were alive again, humming with quiet life. Around them, construction drones of the ECC worked beside the glider teams of the Thal Dominion, metal and flesh, code and instinct, rebuilding the floodgates in tandem. Children from the nearby colonies ran along the rails, laughing as static made their hair lift toward the sky. One of them, a boy named Tiv Wren, traced his fingers along a still warm conduit and asked, "Does it still sing?" Sarah smiled, the faint reflection of plasma light softening her features. "It hums," she said. "Songs are what come after." Beyond the flats, the newly formed Interstellar Energy Council broadcast its first declaration. The Treaty of Talamere would become the foundation for every future energy accord. No weaponized grids, no privatized storms. The twin signatories, Earth and the Dominion, were bound not by ink or code, but by the shared pulse of a lightning-born signature embedded in the planet's crust. Cale and Sarah stood side by side as the message echoed through the relay towers. Around them, the workers paused, some bowing their heads. For the first time in memory, the basin didn't flicker with warning lights. It glowed with equilibrium. Night deepened, and the bridge's arc brightened to full power. The plasma veins stretched from horizon to horizon, mirrored perfectly in the calm water below. To an observer from orbit, it looked as if Talamere itself had drawn a constellation in self-defense, and then chosen to keep it as decoration. Sarah turned to Cale. "Do you think they'll remember how close we came to ending everything?" He watched the faint glow tracing her reflection. "They'll remember what we built to stop it. That's enough." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet stone and ozone, the clean kind, not the kind that followed destruction. High above, the last trace of the old storm drifted away, a single ribbon of light dissolving into the upper sky. It faded slowly, leaving a warmth that didn't vanish but spread into the bridge, into the mud, into the hearts of those rebuilding. On Talamere, the current no longer fought itself. It simply flowed, and that was the Silt Treaty, a story of lightning, forgiveness, and the fragile balance between worlds. If you felt the current of this story, the quiet after the storm, then you already understand what Cale and Sarah fought for. Every story like this takes time to craft. The science, the soul, the silence between the words. If you'd like to hear more journeys across strange stars and human hearts, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these worlds alive and the current flowing.